Give me 1 second here. Hey, everyone. Thank you all for being on time. I appreciate that more than you know. All right. Anybody have any questions from last week or anything that you're learning this week? Anything you want more information about or that you want to talk about? All right. You can always ask your questions here, or you can ask them, as they come to you. Send me a text message in Canvas inbox. I'm always happy to answer questions that way. All right. And again, thank you all for being right on time. That makes it a lot easier if everybody's here. And I start right on time, whether you're here or not. So I always want to get things going as we can. All right. So what we're going to be talking about today is the cell membrane, the importance of the cell membrane. Hold on, I have a message here I need to. Okay. Yes, that's fine. The private message, that's fine. Okay. Now,
the living machinery.
Oh, sorry. Went a little bit too fast. All right, so I want you to start by watching this video about the cell membrane, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Between the living machinery of the inner cell and the harsh conditions of the outside world stands the cell's plasma membrane.
Can y'all hear that?
As crucial as this barrier is, it's surprisingly flexible. Push it and watch it move. Poke hard enough and it might break and begin to regroup. The lipid molecules of the membrane naturally assemble in a double layer because their tails repel water as their heads attract it. Throw in some cholesterol and a few carbohydrates, and you have the basic structure of a plasma membrane. Within these lipid molecules, we also find different proteins which do various things for the cell. For instance, they receive signals from the world outside, or they transport nutrients and waste. So nature composes the membrane with a combination or mosaic of different lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. And these molecules are not stationary. They constantly move within the structure, fluidly changing their positions. The survival of all life rests on this veil of material. A supple membrane, just 2 molecules thick.
So this is really a very remarkable structure, this cell membrane. And we're going to talk about some of the pretty cool nature of it today. First, though, I want to talk a little bit about OpenStax. So as you know, we didn't get to this last week, so I want to go over it now. You know that we use OpenStax. It's one of the resources that we have. It's in the course classroom resources on the homepage. So OpenStax is, think of it as an additional resource. If you want more information besides what's just in the lessons that I've given you, you can often get that from OpenStax. So I want to show you what OpenStax looks like so that you can go. So this right here, everybody see that? You can see if you go to click on the link that is in the classroom resources, this is what you'll see. And you can look at the book details. You guys won't have instructor resources in yours, but you'll have student resources. So I'll show you what that is. Now you can download a PDF of any one of these pages for anybody who doesn't want to read online. You can download that. You can also buy the book. That's a possibility. You can buy a copy of the book. I don't recommend doing that because we don't use it all that often. It's just really an extra resource for you to be able to use. So let's take a look at some of the book details. So right here, you can see there is the summary. There are the contributors. You can go to a bookstore. I want to go to where we're going to see the view online part. That's where you will see the actual book itself. That's pretty cool, Savannah, that you can do that. Savannah says, I'm literally using a TV as a screen. Yeah, so you're gonna have a nice big picture of all of this, right? So right here, you can see that there are a lot of different topics that would be within this. Sometimes I'll assign them for you to read. Sometimes they're just here for you to look through. So you can search this book for any term, anything that you don't want, that you don't know the answer to. So let's say that you don't understand the difference between ipsilateral and contralateral. So let me type in ipsilateral. It will tell you the definition here. This is the little glossary, as well as where you can find that in the book. So that's a pretty cool thing. Ipsilateral means on the same side. That's fine. That's fine. Sometimes, I'll tell you things to use. Sometimes you can just use it as your own. I want to go back to where it says student resources right here. And you can see there's some really cool things in the student resources section. So there's a pronunciation guide that you can download to help you learn the correct pronunciation of key terms. Now, in your lessons, I have pronunciation guides right in the lesson. I highly recommend that you listen at least once to the vocabulary when they're the key terms, that you go through and learn how to pronounce those correctly. One of the problems with learning, especially a science class online, is you might not hear it spoken enough times. So you need to make sure that you're pronouncing it quickly. There's also a anatomy zone right here. So this has some high quality pictures and illustrations. Now it is narrated by someone who's British. So not all the pronunciation is going to be accurate, but a lot of it's going to be. So in this anatomy zone, there are some 3D models, there's some video tutorials, and there are some interactive 3D things. So I have right here, I have an interactive 3D that I'm going to just drag in and show you this. So there would be these upper limb tutorials. Actually, let me go back and show you. So if you click on anatomy zone and then the tutorials, you can see that you can search it for anything that you want. You can look at all of these different parts of the body. This is just a fun place to go and play around. If you really want to learn the body, this is a good place to do it. So let's take a look here at the upper arm, and then let's do the bones of the hands and the wrist. So you can see right there. Now this will show you.
Okay, so this is a tutorial on the bones of the hand.
Okay, so you can
So
see he's
in
got
the
a
hand,
British
you've got
accent. So
multiple bones,
some of them are
each
going to be a
one.
little bit different, but it's good. It's useful. A lot of these are useful. Now there's also lecture notes in this. Nope, I'm going to be here. Here we go, right down here. There's guided reading and note-taking guide, a student time management guide, and some guided lecture notes. So those guided lecture notes are there. They line up with the chapters that are in OpenStax. So if you don't understand a topic well enough, you might go to that chapter in OpenStax and read through it while you fill out the lecture notes. It's really just another way to look at it. And also, OpenStax is college level. So we're at a little bit above what you would get at most high school levels. We're kind of in between college level and high school, but this is a strict college level course. So it's going to go into some more detail and some more of these sections than I do in this course that you're taking. So if you want to use more, I recommend using OpenStax along with the content that I provide for you in the lessons. All right, anybody have any questions about OpenStax? Again, you can always access it by going to the classroom resources on the homepage of our book. If I ever do have anything that is taken from OpenStax, I always cite it. There'll always be a link in there telling you this page came from OpenStax. All right. I said last week that we are going to be following some grammar rules starting soon. In the next week or so, I'm going to be taking off points. Honestly, I don't think I'm going to be taking off many. Those of you who have turned in work have done an excellent job. So I'm seeing some really good writing, and that's very encouraging to me. But I will, in the future, take off just a little bit, maybe a quarter of a point when there are some repeated grammar errors. And I want to show you what it is that I'm looking for. So there's just a couple of things that I'm going to look for in this class. First is capitalization. Please capitalize the first word of every sentence. The personal pronoun I. and the names of specific people, places, and things. So this only has to do with things that are graded. When you're typing here in the chat box, you can use text speak. When you're sending me a message through Canvas inbox, I'm not grading that, so I'm not looking for perfection in that. But when you submit homework, when you submit a quiz or a test or a lab report or an essay, on those things, I want the capitalization to be accurate. I want you to use full sentences. Remember that a sentence has a subject and a predicate. If you don't know what a predicate is, look it up. But basically, most of the time, a predicate is a verb, an action word. So you're going to have a subject and a verb in any full sentence. Please don't start your sentences with the word because. It's best not to, all across the board, not just in my class. Now, there are a couple of situations where it's okay to do that. So, for example, if you have two parts to your sentence and the clauses are connected with the comma, like in the sentence, because the plant did not grow, I hypothesized that there was not enough water. You can use because for that one. It kind of replaces since in that question, in that statement. The other time is when you are having a conversation with someone. So when you're answering something spoken, like we're doing right here. If I say, why didn't the plant grow? You can say, because you didn't water it. All right. But when you're doing a written assignment, it's really just best to avoid it. And then finally, punctuation. Statements, sentences end with punctuation. Statements have a period or an exclamation point, and questions end with a question mark. So here they are. Now, there's a lot more grammar rules than this, as you know, if you've taken an English class, but these are the ones that I'm going to look for and the ones that I'm going to grade on. All right. When you send me a message through Canvas inbox, please be as specific as you can so that I can help you as quickly as possible. Give me the name of the lesson, the number of the lesson, what exactly the quiz question number that you're having a problem with is. Don't just write to me and say, I don't understand question 3 on today's assignment. I don't know what you're working on today because some people work ahead, some are a little bit behind the due date. So I need to know the number, and then give me as much detail as you can. Don't just say, I don't understand. Say, okay, I thought this was true, but it doesn't seem to be, something like that, so that I can help you as quickly as I can. And please make sure that you're getting the announcements. If today's announcement for our class today did not go to your email or your parents' email, whichever one you're using, that means you didn't verify your email address, and you need to make sure that you do that. If ever anything comes up and I can't make it to class, that's how I'm going to let you know. If ever there's an emergency with AIM Academy, I'm going to let you know in that way. So if ever you have to bring materials to class, that's how you're going to get the notice that you need to bring something to class. So please make sure that you are getting those. All right. And then I think this is my last bit of homework. Oh, I misspelled that one. Finding the answers to the quiz questions. I really just want to remind you guys that all quizzes, all tests, everything that you do in my course is open book and open note. You can use the internet. You can use your book. You can use other books. You can use the text that I have down for you. You can use OpenStax. What you can't do, though, is ask someone else, including AI or Siri or Google or anything that you use, to tell you the answer, right? So like I talked about last week, why do I have open book, open note? Again, I want you to learn how to do research. I want you to learn how to find information. So according to the US Department of Labor, the top 10 jobs that were in demand in the last 10 years didn't even exist 20 years ago. And that trend is likely to continue for a long time. The meaning of that is most of you are in school to prepare you for a job that does not yet exist, using technologies that have not yet been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. Memorizing a bunch of facts is not going to help you. Most of you guys are going to need to be able to think and question and research, determine possible hypotheses for your problems, test them. In other words, you're going to have to use the scientific method over and over again in your daily life, in your jobs, really no matter what job you someday do. So get ready to spend this year learning to ask more questions, learning to go deeper than the surface level for some of this, learning to do some research, really learning to make your education your own. All right. Googling the actual quiz question isn't allowed, but Googling information about the quiz question is. It's a fine line there, Anastasia, but that's an excellent question. What I don't want you to do is, let's say, let me, you know what? Let me pull one up here. Hold on one second. All right, patience with me. All right, so let's just do a random question here. So here we go. Let's take a look at, today is September 4th. So let's take a look at one that was due yesterday. Yeah. No, that doesn't have a, we want to do a quiz. Let's look at this one's due tomorrow. So here are some of the questions that you have for this for tomorrow. The cell cycle. All right. Which of the following is not a stage of mitosis? Let me see if there's a. Okay, so what I don't want you to do is go to ChatGPT or the internet and type in, what are the stages of mitosis, and then copy and paste. See, this is a different, this is more of a, I'm going to go back and try and find one that is a written one. That's not a very good example here. Here we go. So this is a written exam. So you're going to have to come up with the answers to the questions here. So distinguish between anatomy and physiology. I don't want you to copy this, put it in ChatGPT or any kind of Google search, and then copy and paste the answer. But if you can't remember what the word anatomy means, you can go to the internet and you can Google, what is anatomy? You can Google, what is physiology? And then you can write up your own comparison of the two. And this is what that plagiarism check is going to be looking for. It's going to be looking for somewhere that you copied and pasted answers from, not where you got research to Google information about the question and then write it in your own words. I know it's a fine line. That's why I really see that plagiarism check as something to help you rather than something to catch you. It's going to help you know, did I follow the rules here? Did I use integrity in writing this assignment, or did I not? If you get a message back from it the first time you submit and it says 70% of this comes off the internet, then you know, okay, what I did wasn't right. And contact me and say, I don't understand why this is saying that it was wrong when it wasn't. I'm here to help you, and I'll help you understand what is right about that and what isn't. Does that make sense? Are we allowed to use ChatGPT as an outline? So if you're between the ages of 13 and 18, you have to get your parents' permission to be able to use ChatGPT. If you have their permission and you are confident yourself that you know how to use it without cheating, without plagiarizing, in a way that helps you learn, then by all means. I use ChatGPT almost every day. It is an amazing resource. It helps me to understand things that might be a little beyond what I already know. It helps me to put things into words that I think students might understand a little bit better. I'll use ChatGPT to help rewrite some of my paragraphs. I'll say, you know, clarify this statement, and I'll type my paragraph into ChatGPT and it'll help me. So I use it. But you have to cite it when you use it, and you have to make sure that the use of it is not plagiarism. You can't just copy and paste something from it and put it in. You guys know the difference between I'm using this to get out of doing work and I'm using this to help me understand, right? Make it yours. Make your education your own. Use these resources to help you learn, not to keep from learning. All right, great question. All right, so let's move on. And let's see here. Yeah, I want to do this. It's kind of fun. I want to do a little let's get acquainted game, because the more we can get to know each other, the more fun the class is going to be. So the beginning of somewhere in the next couple of classes that we have, we'll do a few question and answer kinds of things. So just type your answer into the chat box here. And here's the first one. Using just one word, name something that makes you happy. What makes you happy? Swimming, sunshine. Yeah, sunshine makes me happy too. Birds, books, jujitsu. Cool. Kittens, dance, more cats, got a lot of cat lovers. No, any dogs coming up in here? Cooking. Oh, that's a good one, Rain. If you can cook, if you like to cook, that'd be an awesome thing to do. Flying. Oh, like on an airplane? Yeah, you fly a plane, don't you, Monica? Yeah, that's very cool. I think that would make me fly too. Still on my bucket list to learn how to pilot a plane. There's time, there's time. All right, excellent answers. Rock climbing, that's a fun one too. That's kind of scary looking to me when I see these people climbing up the edge of a rock face. Very cool. All right, here's the next question. What is your least favorite food? What comes to mind when you think of least favorite? Fish? Libby, I have fish almost every day. I have fish. I love fish. Kale, yeah, I can see kale. Broccoli. Soup, that's pretty general. That's a pretty general thing. All soup? Anything with onion. Go ahead, what?
I just like most types of soup.
Yeah, well, that's fine. That's fine. It's all the food mixed together in one bowl, isn't it? Yeah, that's basically what soup is. Sausages, broccoli, tomatoes, spinach, certain meats. All right. How about this one? If you could have 25 hours in each day, what would you do with the extra hour? Yeah. Americans are chronically under rested. We don't sleep enough. And it's pretty dangerous. We'll actually talk about that later in the year, about the importance of sleep and how to get more, and how to have the quality of your sleep be better. Study more. Yeah. All right. Next question. If you could be in the Guinness Book of World Records, what record-breaking feat would you like to be remembered for? Most hours slept. I love it. Like in a row or over a course of a month. Being the most lucky person. Finding the cure. Yeah, that would be awesome. Most time spent outside. Most hours of jujitsu. That keeps coming up. You must love jujitsu, Olivia. Highest dirt bike jump. Fastest person. Most push-ups. Oh, I love how active these all are. Because you know, activity is an important part of health. Longest time upside down, fastest swimmer, farthest swimmer, fastest skater, falling a great distance and being fine. You'd have to land on something really soft, May. Yeah, very cool. Longest time with a horse. All right, these are great answers. Last question, using just one word, name something that drives you crazy. Rap, your brothers, loud chewing. Yeah, siblings always show up when I ask this question, but I can almost guarantee you'll be good friends with your siblings when you're older. It's just right now that probably do drive you crazy. Noise, sometimes people, screeching. Yeah, excellent. All right, great answers. Nothing drives you crazy. That's good. Noise. Yeah, I would probably put traffic, bad traffic in that list for me. All right, well done, well done. Okay, so in your lesson on Monday, you guys reviewed the cell and you reviewed the organelles that were in the cell. At least I hope it was a review. I hope that it wasn't the first time you were encountering any of this. If it was, make sure that you reread that lesson and that you understand the organelles inside a cell and what they do, because cells are important. So we have to remember all the time, the vast majority of the things that happen in the body happen inside your cells. Now, in order to do that, some things have to get in, but not everything. And some things have to get out, but not everything, right? So things have to be able to pass back and forth. Now, we know that things like oxygen has to get in. We know water has to get in, but there's a lot more that needs to be able to get in. We know carbon dioxide has to get out. That can toxify the cell really quickly. So that has to get out. But there's a lot more that also has to get out. So vitamins and minerals and amino acids have to get in. Sugars have to get in, fats have to get in. Hormones have to sometimes get into some cells, but they have to get out of the cells that made them. Muscle cells have to be able to move calcium ions through the cell, and all cells pump sodium and potassium back and forth. The majority of energy in a cell is spent maintaining the balance of sodium and potassium. The majority of energy, pretty cool. So there was a lesson that had that, the Monday due date talked about this. I want to go into more details about how cell membranes work as gatekeepers to control what goes in and out of a cell. So this is an electron micrograph of a cell membrane. So take a look here at the double layered structure. So this would be the outside of the cell right here. This would be the inside of the cell right here. This is the membrane. It's got 2 layers, and I'll show you a close-up of what those layers look like. So if you think about what a cell membrane has to do, how it has to keep some things out and some things in, but allow some things to pass back and forth, you can understand why we call it semi-permeable. It's semi-permeable. It allows some things to pass through, but not everything. So right here is another electron micrograph picture of a cell membrane. So all cells have one. Every kind of cell, whether the smallest bacterial cell all the way up to the largest nerve cell in the human body, which runs from your spine down to your near to your toes, is one of the longest cells. They all have a cell membrane. And this is what cell membranes do. They control what comes in and what goes out in attempts to maintain that balance that we learned about last week called homeostasis. That's what the body's trying to do all the time, is maintain homeostasis. In addition to letting things go in and come out, they also protect and support the cell. So the cell membrane itself is made up of what's called phospholipid molecules. So this is what the molecule is going to look like right here. And this would be a little drawing of it where it's got the head at the top that likes water. It's a hydrophilic head. And then you've got the tails that hate water, hydrophobic tails. And you can see that there's some structures that are embedded right in that cell membrane at the top there. So what it looks like, it is 2 layers of those phospholipids. So the phosphate head is water loving, hydrophilic. The tails are hydrophobic. They don't like water. And then you've got the things embedded inside, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates. Those are all embedded in the cell membrane. And there are glycoproteins in that membrane too. I'll tell you what those are in just a minute. Here's a cute cartoon that can be a good way to remember that the inside of the membrane is hydrophobic. Membrane pranks. Hey guys, I have a water gun. And look, the hydrophobic part is leaning away from the water gun. The tails love water. I'm sorry, the heads love water. The tails hate water. They are hydrophobic. They don't like water. All right, so back to the glycoproteins. Anybody heard of glycoprotein or know what they do? They're pretty cool. They have a pretty important role. They provide identification for the cell. Oh, Liv, if you had only put an ID, you'd have gotten it right. You put that K in, and now it's, they ID the cell. That's what they do. They identify the cell. So take a look at a glycoprotein right here. Right here is a glycoprotein. So we have this pink strand of pearls at the top. That's a carbohydrate. That's where the glyco part comes from. And then the blue at the bottom is the protein. So this is like a marker to let the body know that this cell belongs here. You know, I belong to Rain. I belong to Monica. I belong to Talani. And nobody else is going to have the same glycoprotein on their cells that you do. It's unique to you and you alone. So it lets the body know that I belong here, you shouldn't attack me. So if a cell that doesn't have your glycoprotein comes in, your body knows it doesn't belong and it attacks. This is how, and in a large part, this is how our bodies know to go after and destroy bacteria, because the bacteria has its own glycoprotein. It doesn't match yours. It doesn't look the same. Chemically, it's not the same. So what do you think would happen if there was some kind of a genetic mutation that led to defective glycoproteins? What if your body wasn't making a certain part of your body wasn't making the right glycoproteins? Anastasia. Sorry, I didn't hear you. No, not hearing you. Talani? Think you had your hand up? Did somebody else have their hand up? Yeah, you guys have got it here. Anastasia, you got it. You typed it. Yeah, it would lead to autoimmunity. The body would begin attacking those cells that had a glycoprotein that was not normal, that just didn't say to the body, I belong here. Now, we'll talk about autoimmunity in detail when we get talking about the immune system later in the year. There's a lot more to autoimmunity than just a defective glycoprotein, but that is one possible cause of autoimmunity. All right, so this is what the cell membrane looks like. So you have these water-loving heads, water-hating tails on the inside, and look at how they're structured so they point inward. There are two layers of molecules that point inward like this, and embedded throughout all that are proteins. Now that all this moves around, picture the cell membrane as being like a bunch of plastic balls that you throw on top of a swimming pool. And as they're on the swimming pool, they're going to trade places with each other. And now let's say you throw some beach balls in too. Well, now the beach balls are going to move around. And now you throw a couple of frisbees, and those frisbees float on the top. Now the frisbees, the beach balls, and those plastic balls are all going to trade places with one another. That's a really good picture of what the cell membrane looks like on both sides. It's called fluid mosaic because it's made of a bunch of mosaic-like pieces, and they move. On both sides, they're all going to be constantly moving around as needed. So we call it a fluid mosaic model. And here's another picture of it right here. So we've got this fluid mosaic model. All these pieces move around and they're different. You've got proteins, you've got carbohydrates, you've got some lipids that are embedded in this membrane. You've also got some transport proteins. So there are some things that just pass through. They can just go in and out easily, right between these little balls, right between the heads of the phospholipid molecules. Some things, though, can't. So we have to have a way to get things in that are either too big to go right through, or they don't have the right charge in order to go through. We have transport proteins that allow that to happen. So there's a couple of different kinds of transport systems that the body uses. Remember that cells need to take stuff in, get rid of stuff. They also need to communicate with one another. And they use two ways in order to do those things, in order to let things in or let things out. One way doesn't require any energy. The other way does. Passive transport does not require any energy in order for things to move through. They just simply move with what we call down the concentration gradient. So this is a good picture. If you're rolling a ball down a hill, doesn't take any energy at all. Just let go and the ball rolls down. Rolling up, though, is a lot more work. That takes a lot of energy. Passive transport is like the downhill roll. Doesn't take any energy at all. It's going to go from where something's highly concentrated to where it's not. Think about when someone on the other side of the kitchen starts peeling an orange. Doesn't take very long for you to start smelling that orange if you're sitting right beside them. If you're sitting on the other side of the room, it takes a little bit longer. Because right where the orange is being peeled, the molecules in the air are very concentrated. They're going to spread out. They're going to go down the concentration gradient from where they're highly concentrated to where they're less concentrated. That is passive transport. Active transport requires energy, so we'll get to that. So there's three kinds of transport that don't require energy: diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. So diffusion is where we move molecules from a place where they're real tight to an area where they're more spread out. You can think of this as being like if you have a room that's packed full of people and somebody removes the walls, those people are going to start spreading out. They're going to go from where they're tightly packed to where they're not very packed at all. Now, energy is not required for this. And once those molecules are evenly spread out through a space, we call that equilibrium. They've reached equilibrium. So back to the orange, once all the molecules from that orange are evenly distributed in that room, it's reached equilibrium. Now the molecules are still going to be moving because that's what molecules do. Molecules move. So they're still going to be moving, but they've reached equilibrium because there's the same amount spread throughout the room. That's diffusion. Now, diffusion can happen when there isn't a membrane. Diffusion can also happen where there is a membrane. So if a membrane is permeable, that means things can pass through it. Semi-permeable means some things can pass through it, but not everything. But they're always going to move from where they're highly concentrated to where they're not concentrated until we get to equilibrium. This is mostly for small particles that don't have a charge, like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and most lipids. They're just going to pass right through that cell membrane, back and forth as is needed. No energy required because it's passive transport. Another one is called facilitated diffusion, and don't let the word facilitated confuse you. There's still no energy that is involved here. It's just that there are some molecules that are too big to pass through the membrane. They have to pass through a bigger channel, think of a tunnel through the membrane. There's a big tunnel that allows large molecules or charged molecules to move through, but they easily move. They just have to have this channel in order to do so. So no energy is needed for facilitated diffusion. Mostly it's things like ions and large molecules like chloride and glucose. And they move through these channel proteins. They're like carriers. Now there's one for each kind of molecule. Glucose is going to have its own channel protein. Chloride is going to have its own channel protein. So chloride doesn't go through the glucose protein channel, right? So there's a lot of different kinds in there. Again, this is passive transport. No energy is required for this. And then finally, the third kind of passive transport is called osmosis. So the diffusion of water is so important, it gets its own name. That name is osmosis. Osmosis is just diffusion of water through that semi-permeable membrane. It's still going to be going down the concentration gradient from where it's very concentrated to where it's not. It's still going to be moving without using energy. No energy is needed for diffusion, including the diffusion of water, which we call osmosis. Now, what's really interesting in the body is this osmosis can result in the movement of water or either into or out of some of your cells. So let's take a look here at a normal cell. This is a normal cell where this is a blood cell right here, a normal animal blood cell. Water can go in and it can go out as needed, back and forth. So it has just the right amount of water. But if I put that blood cell into a container of, say, salt water that has way more salt in it than the blood cell does, water wants to move in a direction to spread out the solutes. So it's like the water goes in here. Hey, there's too much salt out there. We need to move those salt molecules farther away from each other. It's going to rush out of the cell to try to diffuse out, to try to decrease the concentration. In other words, to get in between those salt molecules and push them apart. So if we do the opposite, if we put it into a distilled water solution where there's no salt on the outside, and now there's a lot of salt inside the cell compared to what's outside, now water is going to rush into the cell and it can cause that cell to burst. So much water can rush in. So this is the reason, if you've ever heard that you can't drink ocean water if you're stranded at sea, if you're out on a boat and there's nothing to drink, you'll die faster if you drink ocean water than if you drink nothing at all. And this is why, because you're putting salt water into the body, it's going to pull water out of your cells. It's actually going to dehydrate you and you'll die faster. Here's a hint too. If you ever get blood on your clothes, let's say you cut yourself and you get some blood on your shirt. If you soak that shirt in salt water, it will cause the water to leave those blood cells. The cell now becomes real small and it can fit through the fibers of your shirt when you wash it. So soaking it in salt water is a way to get blood out of clothing. Kind of interesting. All right, that's all passive transport. No energy is required. In active transport, energy is required. We have to have energy, and energy for all living things. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Anastasia. Do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So for the, I think it's hypertonic, is that the one where the solute on the outside? Hypotonic, sorry. What would cause your whatever concentration in your body to be lower than the cell. You
So-
mentioned like salt water would make it more, but what would cause it to be lower?
Distilled water, water that doesn't
Okay.
have any nutrients in it at all. It's not a good idea to drink distilled water because it is not going to have any salts in it at all. Now, pure water that doesn't have anything in it at all is really not found on Earth because almost all of our water is mixed with something else. It's almost all got a little higher, a little lower pH. So it's mixed with other things. And a lot of those things are things that we need. We need a lot of the minerals that come in the water that we drink. So if you drank only distilled water, now, again, our bodies are constantly trying to maintain homeostasis. So drinking distilled water it's not going to kill you. It probably, I'm always careful to avoid extremes with the body, but it's probably not going to kill you. It's just going to mean your body has to work harder to pull nutrients out, to pull some of those minerals out, to put them into the solution around your cells to keep them from having too much water rush in. Yeah, good question. All right, back to this energy. The energy molecule that is used by all living things on planet Earth is ATP. What does that stand for?
That adenosine triphosphate.
Very good, Monica. Adenosine triphosphate. So when net energy is needed, an ATP molecule provides that energy. We'll talk about how that happens in a future course, a future lesson. Active transport is when we move from where the particles are not very concentrated to where they are. So to use our example of people in a room, this would be, you got a room full of people and you got just a few people on the outside. It's not very concentrated out there, but we need to move them into that crowded room. We're going to have to push them to get them in. We need energy to do that. Active transport pushes things against the concentration gradient where they go from where they're not concentrated to where they are. That requires energy. And there's a couple different kinds. There's molecular transport, protein pumps. This is a big one for the body. And then there's bulk transport, exo and endocytosis. So let's look at endocytosis first. The prefix endo means in. So endocytosis is where we're bringing something into the cell. So this would be the inside of the cell right here. This would be the outside of the cell right here. So something is coming up. It's wrapped in the same membrane, this vesicle, and it puts something into the cell. Endocytosis means in. There's two kinds. There's pinocytosis and phagocytosis. Those are the two kinds of endocytosis. So this one shows pino. It means little. So it brings little things in, liquid or small things into the cell. So this would be the outside of the cell. This would be the inside. It pinches off, bringing these things into the inside of the cell. This one is phagocytosis. So this is for larger things. And you can see right here, this amoeba is circling around this paramecium, the two of them, bringing them in. It is phagocytosis. It's pulling them into its own body by wrapping around. That's endocytosis. So the opposite of that then is going to be exo. Exo, think exiting. That's where something has to get out of the cell. So exocytosis would be used by a cell that makes a hormone that's needed in other parts of the body. It makes the hormone, it wraps this vesicle around the hormone, which then fuses with the cell membrane and becomes one and releases it to the outside. It's just the opposite direction. Now, this is one of those pumps. Within the membrane of almost all human cells, there's a very important pump called the sodium-potassium pump. And this is a really important form of active transport. So we're going to learn throughout this course that the concentration of sodium and potassium has to be just right for many of the functions that a cell does. The sodium-potassium pump brings potassium into the cell and pumps sodium out of the cell. Both cases, they're going against the concentration gradient. They're going from where they're not very crowded to where they're very crowded, and they need to push them in. They require energy to do that. The sodium-potassium pump uses a lot of energy. It accounts for up to 40% of the body's energy consumption. That means of all the ATP that your body makes, think of all the things that have to happen in your body. Of all the ATP, 40% of it is used to pump sodium and potassium across the cell membrane. That should give you an idea of how important this sodium potassium pump is. 40% of all the energy. So think of it as 40% of the food that you eat is converted into energy to power this pump. All right, so here you can see that ATP is needed and it's broken down to ADP to power this pump. So let's watch this. So here we have the inside of the cell at the bottom. This is the extracellular or outside of the cell. So the sodium is going to be pumped out. When those sodiums are there, ATP is needed. So here comes our ATP. It's broken apart and one of the phosphates is left behind and energy is released in that. It changes the shape of the pump, letting those sodiums out. Now, 2 potassiums are brought back in for every 3 that are pumped out. Pretty cool. Again, this is going against the concentration gradient. Here's a kind of a real life example of a passive transport. There's a protein that's called CFTR protein. What CFTR does is it helps to maintain the amount of salt and water on a lot of your body surfaces. So let's look at the surface of the lungs. We know that our lungs have to be moist. There has to be just the right amount of water and salt on the surface of the lungs or they won't function properly. So when this protein, the CFTR protein, isn't working correctly, a component of salt, which is chloride, you guys know salt is sodium chloride. One of the salts is sodium chloride. So that chloride gets trapped in the cells. Without the proper movement of chloride, now water can't get onto the surface to hydrate it. Well, think about what might happen to the mucus in your lungs if it wasn't watery enough. It gets really thick, it gets really sticky, and it causes many of the symptoms that are associated with a disease called cystic fibrosis. So if the gene that codes for this protein is faulty, then the protein won't work properly. If the protein doesn't work properly, water can't get out of the cell to thin the mucus, and that causes cystic fibrosis. And if the gene is faulty, the protein will not work properly. So that's just one example of the importance of passive transport to allow the water to go in and out. Now, there are some treatments for cystic fibrosis. You can see those right there. But it's fortunately, a lot of what they're doing with gene editing right now is really helping people with cystic fibrosis. And they're thinking that this might not be a deadly disease for much longer. So I don't know if you guys know anybody who has cystic fibrosis. Usually people die by the time they're 20, but now they're living a lot longer than that. All right, here's a little bit of interesting information about the cell membrane for you. First of all, before we go into the interesting information, anybody have any questions about passive transport, active transport, movement across the membrane, the structure of the cell membrane? Everything that we're going to learn the rest of the year happens because of these membranes. Like I said last week, we study things isolated, but they all work together to try to maintain homeostasis. All right, so remember that the cell membrane on the outside loves water. So the blue on the outside loves water. On the inside, it's kind of, think of it as being oily. On the yellow, it doesn't like water. Well, there are ions that are like sodium and potassium that don't like the oily inside. So they have to be transported in and out through these pumps that we have. Some of these pumps like this one would pump things in and out. It's only very small, uncharged molecules like oxygen that can dissolve into the membrane and pass in and out at will. Now, look at this cholesterol right here. Cholesterol is really common in our cell membranes. Cholesterol gets a bad rap. People, a lot of times you'll hear people saying, oh, I got to bring my cholesterol down. If you didn't have cholesterol in your cell membranes, they would not be flexible. They would not bend and flex the way they're supposed to. They would be rigid and they would crack. They would break apart. So this cholesterol makes the membrane more flexible. So red blood cells, think about what a red blood cell has to do. A red blood cell is real small, has to go through tiny, tiny little capillaries, little bitty blood vessels. So it has to be able to flex and bend real well to get through those tiny little capillaries. We'll learn when we study blood, the smallest capillaries, those red blood cells go single file. That's how small those capillaries are, that the cells go single file all the way through. Think about the amount of cholesterol you would have to have in a red blood cell. Red blood cells tend to be very rich in cholesterol. So you don't want to eliminate cholesterol from your diet. You want to make sure that you're getting enough to keep the flexibility in your cell membranes, particularly in your red blood cell membranes. I think this is really cool too. All of your cells, most of your cells, are held together to other cells of the same kind. They're almost touching by thousands of protein units that are called connexons. So right here, you can see this connexon right here. Will your body not be able to make it? Yes, your body can make it, but it has to have the building blocks. Like everything else, you have to give it the building blocks. So you need to be able to make sure that you're giving it the building blocks that it needs in order to make them. And, you know, the best way, like if you need protein, the best way to have it is to give it protein, and then it can break it apart. Like think of all these nutrients of the body as like being Legos, that if you've got the pieces you need, you can take it apart and make something else. But if you don't have the pieces you need for that something else, then sometimes the body has to take itself apart in order to get the pieces that it needs. So yeah. So back to the connexons. So these connexons are they're in the center right here. This would be called a gap junction. So that's the little tiny space in between two cells. Well, they're tubes. These connexons are tubes that poke through the cell membrane of two adjacent cells like this. And things like sugar and amino acids. So by sugar, I mean primarily glucose. That's what gives the energy, helps us make ATP. So things like glucose and amino acids and ATP and other small particles can pass back and forth from one cell to another. It's pretty interesting. Now, big things like proteins, those can't. Has to be tiny, like bits of amino acids, you know, which are the building blocks of protein. So the big things can't move through. Now, when there's a distress happening, when there's something going wrong with cell 2, it can actually slam shut these connexons. It can seal those tiny little holes. So let's say that the calcium concentration inside the cells suddenly shoots up. Usually it's pretty low. There's usually not a lot of calcium inside a cell. If the calcium levels for some reason shoot up, this cell here is going to say something's wrong, and it will snap its connexon. Usually it's the damaged cell that snaps its connexon shut to keep from damaging its neighbor. And I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. So most of your cells have those. That's, you know, the cell membrane in a nutshell. Keep in mind as you continue learning about all this, that it's the movement of things back and forth across the membrane, sometimes needing energy, sometimes not needing energy, that makes homeostasis possible. Because if it'd be like if you were shut into a room with no doors and no windows, it wouldn't be long till you die. You have to have a way to get food in, you have to have a way to get waste products out. Cities are the same way. If a city has a wall around it and it's under siege and nothing can get in or out, those people aren't going to survive. They're not going to thrive for sure. So cells have to have a way to get things in and out. All right. Anybody have any questions about the cell membrane? All right. Wonderful. Keep up the good work. You know where to find me if you have any questions, and I will see you next week. Thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.